So, to start us off, very simply, can you introduce yourself and tell me a little bit about what you do, please?
So my name is Theodora, Theodora Powers for short. The Greek name is way too long to pronounce, and a lot of people are going to mishear it or misspell it, so I skip that part entirely. Um, I'm an essay consultant, used to work as a ghostwriter, um, and I am currently, uh, I was accepted to law school, and I'm currently trying to bring awareness to the mental or psychosomatic deterrence that DACA recipients experience, as a DACA recipient myself.
Fantastic. And that's kind of why I've sort of asked you to do this chat with me today. So basically, we met a number of years ago when I was doing my journalist in residence stint, storyteller in residence stint with MIT. And you kind of fascinated me when we did that interview because it was amazing to hear about the DACA program in the fact that you were able to work. Your academic achievements astounded me. They still do. You were able to work, you were able to live, you were able to study, you're able to live what how I would have seen at that time comfortably with the being a DACA recipient. But what I didn't realize until sort of getting to know you a little more, and also reading some of your academic work, was that it is a state of, and I'm putting this lightly, Theodora, limbo, where and I obviously done a little bit more research as well, and people are very uncomfortable. It has a lot of effect on mental health, and so that's kind of why, I mean, you always fascinate me anyway, just because of the amount of work you do, and how hard you work, and you're a cool person. I enjoy you. I've enjoyed your company, but I think that more light can be shed on that, because I'm sure there are a number of people in the UK and Europe who have similar experiences as well. That kind of feeling of limbo where they're not allowed to, because of various restrictions, visa wise, etc., not allowed to travel as much. But there's quite a heavy amount of restrictions on you as a DACA recipient, that people who meet you and see your academic achievements, the fact you have been employed in law, and are able to to have an income, and to have an apartment, and a seemingly comfortable life. So people would look at that and go, wow, you're successful, you've achieved all these things. But actually what people aren't seeing or hearing about, often, is these struggles that you're having, and the struggles of thousands and thousands of people that are DACA recipients, who are living in that state of limbo. So that's the sort of short version of why I've brought you here today. But I think my next question to you, talking about DACA, obviously you've done extensive study on this, for your academic work. But what has it meant to you being a DACA recipient, both positively and negatively?
So originally, I chose this topic to be a thesis for my master's. I did my master's in liberal arts in psychology at Harvard's Division of Continuing Education. And one of the options was for me to do a thesis or do a capstone. So I chose to do the thesis route. And what really, having experienced this very limited, access to a lot of resources, having experienced limited upbringing to begin with, the biases, the societal prejudice that exists, on the surface, I can pull off this, racially white, privileged female who's attending an Ivy League university. Like, what struggles do I possibly have or know about? But underneath the surface, I'm sure all of us have, our own secrets, our own depths, our own reasons for not wanting to share who we are, primarily because we're afraid of being stigmatized. This was my case. So I was curious in understanding mostly how does this fluctuation in immigration status, am I the only one who's feeling like I can't get ahead? Am I the only one who's feeling like I'm 10 or 20 steps behind other people? Like I'm still trying to play catch up to my peers who are citizens, who have access to these resources, these privileges. And I decided to look into it more. I decided, let me do research on the self-concept, in other words, how we see ourselves, on the self-concept of DACA recipients specifically. Now I would have to compare and contrast, for the sake of research, with those who have other statuses, like those who have green cards or legal permanent residents, those who are US citizens, those who have temporary visas. I want to compare them. What is it that's different about them? Are they all the same? Maybe is this something I'm personally feeling? Let me understand it. So in having done that research, I wanted to come up with, I wouldn't say an answer, but just to quench that curiosity. I wanted to understand what is it that's impacting us specifically, or at least me specifically, as a DACA recipient, where I cannot grow as an individual. I am allowed to work, I'm allowed to go to school. The end. That is it. Every year and a half, I have to renew my status because it takes about 5 to 6 months to get back the renewal. And it's a temporary, it's a temporary reprieve from deportation here, and it lasts only 2 years. But I wanted to know that, like, how is this affecting me? Like, there are schools that will not accept you because they see you as an investment. And if your status only lasts 2 years, why would they invest in you to study for more than that? They don't even know if you're going to be kicked out of the country at some point. All you need is a single change in the methodology and the regulations, and you're out the door. Where? I don't think anyone cares at this point. You just don't have that stability. So I'm noticing that I'm having, a difficult time either applying to school, sometimes finding a job, sometimes I have limitations to what I can do. I originally wanted to be a forensic psychologist. I wanted to work with government agencies. I wanted to work with police departments. I wanted to go into criminology. I can't do that because I'm not a US citizen. I'm not even allowed to step foot in those particular professions. At which point I had to continuously alter and change. What do I want to do in my life? What profession can I possibly pursue that I don't have someone stopping me at arm's length and telling me, no, you're not allowed to do it. So on the positive side, I wanted to understand what is the psyche behind this? How does it affect people? What is this bias that exists? I mean, I never labeled myself this way. This is a label you placed on me through a bunch of stereotypes that are associated with it and expect me to fit within this compartmentalization of what a DACA recipient is or what any other kind of immigrant status may be. Yeah, and on the negative side, it's really bringing forward all of these, I guess, the similarities that I noted between myself and other participants. Participants were obviously anonymous, but in the self-description questionnaires that I gave them for the research study, the results were similar. Like, we don't know who we are, we don't know where we're going, we don't know what we're doing. There's no stability whatsoever, which other studies, especially in my work, show they're correlated with things like depression, suicide, other forms of mental illness.
Yeah, and I think that's one of my kind of understandings. We had that first interview for the MIT journalist in residence work that I was doing, and one of the things I was fascinated by, because I remember talking to you about, you have to come visit, back in the UK, you have to come and travel. And highlighted back then, and also re-emphasized to me, in preparation for this interview, you cannot legally leave. Well, you can leave the country to travel, but you can't go back. And for me, watching, and this is one of the reasons again why I brought you here, is again there's this kind of sheen of, you have achieved so much. You've been to Harvard, you've been to MIT, you've helped people out. You've supported students from all over, from all over the place with their academic work. Yet you aren't even allowed to leave the country, and that is fascinating to me. So my central question is, how does that affect your mental health? Obviously, you did anonymize your findings, so obviously bring in what you can from your studies if you want to. But for you particularly, because you're here sat in front of me, how does the DACA restrictions, how has it affected your mental health? Because what the world sees of you, and all this success, that's not necessarily what's going on internally.
Well, to get into that, first, I hope that I can at least explain a little bit of what DACA is, because I'm not sure that audiences outside of the US are quite aware of that. Actually, there are people in the country here that don't know what that is. And they are obviously politically active, but they have absolutely no awareness of it whatsoever. So DACA, it stands for short for a Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. Basically, it's people who arrived here in the US as kids. Um, they they grew up here, they were assimilated into the culture. It's not like they made the decision on their own to come. I mean, a 3-year-old cannot break the law, an 8-year-old can't break the law in any way, shape, or form. For all intents and purposes, we grew up and were raised as American. We thought we were part of the entire culture. The concept of immigration is not part of the educational curriculum. It's not even like that word is even popped up in the middle of your textbooks. Now, in noting that around the ages of 16 or 18, when we're supposed to have, put in college applications and take entrance exams like the SATs, you need to have a social security number to do that. We don't have that. We had no proof of the fact that we are here. We assumed, as kids, you're so naive, you're not really aware of the fact that there's this discrimination between yourself and those who are born here. You assume you're part of it. You're part of this group, this in group. Everything else is an out group to you. So when you don't have these very basic foundations for you to apply to school, to start your life, to have an identity, to have a literal card to prove who you are, you begin to wonder, like, so what am I supposed to do? Because the phases of society are already outlined for you. You're born, you live, you die, you go to school, you go to college, you have a family, you have a job. There you go. This is what you look forward to. You want to make an impact in the world, or you want to have, your weekly paycheck. But either way, all these plans that you had when you were, of course, in your most critical developmental years of your life, they're out the window. All of a sudden, people are telling you, you're not American. You have no part with us. You have nothing to do with us. You are not allowed to do this, nothing. So when this program came out in 2012 under the Obama administration, I would say there's approximately 1.7 million people in this country alone who are eligible for the program. Now, with the distrust that exists in government, especially from an immigration population, about 800,000 of them applied, okay? And yeah, myself included. I applied in 2015, I was accepted in 2016. When the Trump administration came in, that number decreased down to about 600,000, maybe 650, approximately. Because in order for us to have this temporary reprieve from deportation, we have to disclose our status as undocumented. We give up ourselves, our name, our location, our entire history and documentation of where we've been up to this point, our biometrics, our family members' names, where they have been. So anything and everything that we need to prove that we were in this country for years, for almost every day of our lives since we first arrived. Now, what did this program do that was extremely helpful? It diminished aspects of illegality, just aspects. We felt secure, we felt like we belong somewhere, we can finally develop. We can have a job, we can go to school, it felt like we can establish something of a foundation. We can grow from there, because basically that's what everyone wants. They want to find a method to survive in society, which is, to weave through these labyrinthine methods of getting food and water and having a family. And that is through work, it is through education. However, at the same time, there are other privileges and protections that are withheld from us that technically go with this lawful immigration status, which technically we're not. The best way I can describe this program, or the way that DACAs exist today, is through being legally illegal in the country. But the cost of having this temporary protection from deportation has restrictions on career developments. It has restrictions on educational advances. We have absolutely no access to federal financial aid, and we have no access to certain healthcare. So when you mentioned to me, and we first met about 3-4 years ago, and you said, let's go to Europe, let's talk about this, let's go to England, I want to show you everything. And yeah, I mean, I'm a European citizen, sure. But once I leave, I can't come back. So we cannot travel abroad on any legal basis. We cannot enter the US if we do travel abroad. We can't serve in the military. There's no federal public benefits, including, loans for school or food stamps. No health insurance. It's provided by employer. We cannot admit relatives into the US. We can't legally work in any or every position that we want unless we have authorization from the Department of Homeland Security. like I mentioned earlier, I wanted to go into, criminal justice. I wanted to work with agencies like the FBI. No. Or even work with police departments and help. No. I cannot apply for US citizenship. There's no pathway, no option for a legal permanent status or residence. I can only apply for a work authorization or have this status renewed every year if I can prove that it's an economic necessity, whatever in the world that means. I have absolutely no statutorily established prospects to remain in the US. And I'm subject to removal by virtue of my presence alone.
Mm, mm. Yeah, it sounds very frightening, and I think that goes back to the first part of my question. In terms of your mental health and the things that again, what the world sees of you, in terms of what you've been able to achieve is fantastic. But equally, yeah, there are restrictions on you. You couldn't do some of the things you always wanted to do because of those restrictions. So what is that like, Theodora, on your mental health from day to day? How does that affect you?
I feel like I'm in limbo. So a lot of people describe me as a very ambitious person. Like I said earlier,
Yeah.
I've been admitted to law school. I want to go for a PhD program. I specifically want to take this research to the next level and study the biases that come out of legal terminologies. How are things phrased? Like when you say that someone is an alien, and it is a legal term to use since the 1790s, how does it affect people? How does it creates the schism? Me personally, I've been in this country for 25 years. To this day, I don't feel like I have a home. I always have to alter myself. I always have to fit within the boxes and check marks that people expect me to fit into in order for me to prove that I'm a model citizen or a model minority citizen at this point. I do everything on my own, despite the fact that it exhausts funds, just to prove that I can basically pull myself up by the bootstraps. I can do this on my own. And I wouldn't call it, maybe struggle is a strong word. It is difficult. It is exhausting because for every success that I have, there are 3 or 4 other obstacles that are thrown my way. All the pursuits that I want to do, all the changes I want to make in public policy, at the end of the day, not only are my qualifications questioned, like, is it a good enough education? Like, where did you get it? Even though it's a US education system. But my loyalty is questioned. Are you actually faithful and loyal to this one sole country that you were raised in and cared for, and you've been here this entire time? All of these are taken into consideration. And just in seeing that you are born in an artificial line, outside of that artificial line, that border, somehow it diminishes your quality as a human being.
Yeah. And there's so much in that, so much negativity in that in terms of the language. You talk about the alien word there, and that was in your study as well. Do you feel like then you put yourself under so much pressure to again achieve academically? Did you put yourself under that pressure as a driven person, or was it mainly because you were a DACA recipient and you felt like, correct me if I'm wrong here, but felt like you had something to prove, or you had something to prove not only to yourself but to the government as well? You had to achieve all these things just to feel normal and not like an alien.
Absolutely. Me personally, I like to learn. I like to grow, but honestly, books, knowledge, and academia have always become my sanctuary. It's the only environment that I felt I would be allowed to grow, that someone cannot limit what I can learn, what I can read, what I can get out of it. All of my educational pursuits are, as you mentioned before, they are to prove something to myself. Am I good enough as a person? Can I be more than what you make me out to be? Let me show you I can do it. But more importantly, like I had mentioned earlier, it's a matter of also qualifications. Everything is based on a merit, on a point system. So the biases that exist, the prejudice that exists, is if you throw out, you use the name Harvard, let's be perfectly honest, everyone capitalizes on the words and the names of Ivy League universities, everyone. And yeah, they are brilliant. The education that I got there was exquisite. It was polymathic. It was inspiring. It was motivational. Uh, I wouldn't even be here without the inspiration that my own thesis advisor and my thesis director gave me to push for this change, to push for the publication of this thesis. So I loved the academic environment at Harvard. It is absolutely worth everything and anything that people say about it, at least the positive things. But that name, any kind of name that you throw from the Ivy League universities, it creates a psychologically and subconsciously, it creates a correlation to think in the mind of the average citizen. There's no way in the world you could possibly ever be undocumented. There's no way in the world that you could ever commit a crime. We cannot synonymize you with criminality, even though you are an alien. I would trust in the acceptance, admissions processes and regulations of these universities to know that they selected a good person. You're a good person, therefore you deserve to have these achievements. There you go. You are the model citizen. You should rise. I applied to these schools because I wanted to prove to myself I was worth more than what my abusive sponsor was saying to me I was, and what government regulations were saying to me I was. I obviously did not fit in the box that they put me into, and I wanted to prove to them that I didn't. But coming out with that education, when I noticed the loopholes that exist when having these names, I pushed for more. But more importantly, I took advantage of the current situation I'm in as a DACA recipient, decided I want to bring awareness to this. We are finally entering an age where we're discussing matters of inclusion and diversity and minority statuses. This is something that we need to draw attention to. And apparently, again, like I mentioned before, being that I'm already seen as a second-rate or third-rate citizen, I need these qualifications to draw attention to it.
Absolutely, absolutely. And obviously you've also worked in the legal system as well in the US. And I wonder, to what extent has that knowledge you've gained in that profession helped you as a DACA recipient in terms of understanding, but also, I guess, again, has it given you a better understanding of how to support yourself, or is it not helped at all in terms of your work and understanding of the DACA, of being a DACA recipient?
So the legal field that I worked in as a legal assistant was strictly family law.
Yeah.
So I did not have anything to do with DACA recipients or immigration at all whatsoever. It focused mainly on domestic abuse, divorce, violence, child abuse, molestation, situations like that. So I didn't really focus on anything that has to do with immigration specifically. However, in being immersed in that environment, and of course, having English as like my fourth language, it allowed me to pay even closer attention to the legal terminologies. It allowed me to pay close attention to the discrepancies or the different ways that we interpret them. Certain terminologies, how we look at them, how we define them in a legal context, in a social science context, in a colloquial context. The conversation that you and I are having right now, depending on what words we use, can be used against us if we have someone from a legal field analyzing them. It can be seen as admissions to something that doesn't really exist. It can be seen as withholding information from something that isn't really there. So working in that field, having worked closely specifically with the forms, the declarations, the discoveries, things that are necessary between parties to provide and to share, it opened my mind up, or at least my perception up to the different ways that we can analyze words, but more specifically, the biases that exist from using those words, especially in a courtroom. So one of the initial interests I had for pursuing a thesis before I changed it to the the self-concept of DACAs, was to look and address the phases of coercive control in domestic violence. Specifically, at which point does it go from having a self-other overlap to developing a relationship with someone to becoming a domestic violence setting? And coercive control was I would say maybe one of the most recent, maybe the last 20, 30 years. It was a concept that was just introduced into psychology specifically for domestic violence victims. I wanted to close the gap. And one of my thesis advisors said to me, you could spend the next 30 to 40 years of your life trying to close the gap. No one's going to figure this out. And it's true. There are matters of ethics involved. You can't just take a person and be like, I'm going to throw you in this environment. I want you to tell me and chronicle everything that's happening to you. It doesn't work that way. But I wanted to close that gap because I noticed that having been in the courtroom, having watched the attorneys actually argue for the sake of one client versus another client, I noted that subconsciously, some of the judges criminalize victimhood. They look at the victim, they say, why didn't you get out of this? Like, why didn't you know any better? Why would you just record the consequences of what your child was experiencing? Why don't you just report it? Like, why? And you cannot explain that. There's no words to express what this feeling of control is. How do you explain to someone, I was forced to be raped every night. Like I couldn't get out of it. How do you explain to someone I had to ask for permission to use the restroom because they were locking the door and I had to go and beg for that? You can't explain it. You normalize it in your mind when you're an abuse victim that this is normal. This is how the society is supposed to function. And finally, when you snap, you've had enough of it and you come before a judge and you mention these stories. I mean, any average person would react the same way. Like, why didn't you do something about it earlier? But again, no one has looked very deeply into this alteration between having a loving relationship and little phases that turn into a coercive control into a domestic abuse relationship. But having worked in that environment with law, I was able to draw out these little loopholes, these little gaps to say, you know what, maybe we need to have a few more lessons, if not a few more classes on the psyche that exists in the gray area called people instead of looking at just the black and white versions of law.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things I admire the most about you, but also the thing I think is probably the most challenging for you is these topics, whether it be DACA or working in family law and dealing with some of these things from a psychological perspective in order to make real change, especially and talking about terminology. I don't want to slander your government or anybody like that, but there's a lot of challenges that I anticipate you are facing, in terms of making these real changes, talking about DACA and talking about some of these terminologies used in law. How are you approaching those now at this stage in your professional life, these challenges, because again, it sounds like you're powering ahead with further study, powering ahead, to make these real changes and to try and make a dent and improve the lives for not only DACA recipients but also people that are dealing with real trauma and and having to have that brought to the world, not necessarily to the world, but brought out in court, for example.
So I am just starting out on my journey, specifically starting out on my journey of getting the right qualifications to be heard. I mean, it's difficult enough for people in this society to have a voice as it is, regardless of immigration status or political beliefs or background, etc. There's millions of us, there's billions of us in the world. And you have millions, if not billions, of online accounts, of online avatars. Everyone is trying to have their voice heard. Everyone. In this particular case, or in my case, I'm just starting out on that journey. I'm just starting out and gaining the right qualifications for me to even be heard. Like I mentioned before, it's enough that I'm already seen as a second, if not third-rate citizen, being a minority within a minority cohort. I could just be seen as that outlier who's just not content, who should know better than to speak up at all, who should just be grateful and accept the fact that you're even lucky to be here in the first place. If, there's something hard in life, well, that's life. You should just deal with it. And that's not how the world, I wouldn't say is supposed to work. I don't have a solution to what happens in the world. But you've lost that humanity. You've lost that connection. You have absolutely no interaction with one another. You have your own little sphere, your own little world that you're fighting tooth and nail to maintain and uphold, regardless of who gets hurt in the process. And if you managed it, well, then everyone else can do it too. You're just not strong enough to make it. Let's not take into consideration the fact that you're missing resources, you're missing access to help, you're missing a voice, you're missing a legal status. I am just starting out in that journey to bring awareness to the fact that I want to focus not only just on the law aspect, but the psychological aspect, which is why I'm pushing through to have law degree and a PhD in social psychology at the same time. Because again, it goes back to having enough qualifications to be heard. And even then, the only thing that's going to be tested afterwards is I'm a woman. Is it something balanced? Are you hormonally balanced for us to listen to you, or are you just acting out? Maybe this is just a very sensitive matter to you. And then of course it's a matter of my loyalty. Like, are you an enemy of this country? Are you trying to make problems? What are you saying that's wrong with us? Who are you, and what are your qualifications to tell us how to fix things, if there are things to be fixed? Well, I am a product of the things that are going wrong, and I see them because you haven't walked in my shoes to see them. You need to be flexible to the people. People shouldn't be flexible to the problems that exist.
Mm, mm. Yeah, I mean that comes into one of the other things I wanted to talk about today. Because again, again, you have achieved. There is still much to achieve, but how do you define success then? Not only as a dreamer, but also a DACA recipient, but also personally and professionally in the legal system. So I guess there's three strands to that question. How do you define success as a DACA recipient? How do you define success working in law? And also personally as well, and academically too. Actually, there's more. All those strands. There's four. So academically, how do you define success, and personally as well, professionally?
Well, on a personal level, and even a professional level, I think it's a combination of both, because it's very difficult for me to differentiate between a personal success and a professional success. My whole life has been just striving to be better and better, and I've gained that confidence through work. I've gained that confidence through study, academia, knowledge, pursuit of greater knowledge. So success for me is the fulfillment I can gain from having an acknowledgement, from being told that I contributed something good to the world, whatever form that may be. Um, I want to share my knowledge. I want to apply my skills. I want to safeguard a kind of purpose for my existence. I want to make a positive contribution to society, so that there's a dynamic, and there's a multivariate collaboration between different mindsets, different experiences, different people. I don't want to reinvent the wheel. I don't want to create a greater schism. There are already extreme opposites when it comes to groups, to parties, to politics. Everyone lives in this in-group and out-group mentality. I don't want to reinvent that. I want to change it. Um, when you look at people generally, there's just humans are such a thriving species. They're stubborn. They have existed for this long, but they're vulnerable. When you throw in the concept of civility, the concept of personhood, which basically means you put on a mask to survive throughout your day, it's a delusion of superiority. You think that only you and you alone are the only thing that matters in this world, and everything else around you is against you. Therefore, you need to fight it, no matter what the cost may be. So I recognize that people have forgotten who they are. They just focus on what they are. And what they are is lonely. I think they make every attempt and every effort to combat this fear of being marginalized in a world that, again, has so many millions and billions of voices just climbing over one another and hiding and suppressing everything else. So that's the personal professional success, my definition of it. I want to draw attention to that. I want to draw awareness. I want to help in such a way that society doesn't feel like they have to go by the phases. They have to go through the rounds and abide by what is already inflexible to the world. I want them to grow this mindset to push for something more, to push for change, and not be content in that little space they created for themselves.
It's a good point you make. I sort of offer a little bit of a gentle challenge, because I guess around the world, obviously particularly in the US, it is difficult to make a dent. It is difficult to push for change, and there is this kind of overarching theme. I've got to be careful too about how I phrase things, But I think there is this theme that, you don't speak out, don't push for change because, we've got it covered, kind of thing. We're okay. And I wonder what would be your advice for anybody else, whether they're a DACA recipient or whether whatever profession they're working in? How do you make a change? Is it simply by, you know, getting as many qualifications as you can, becoming as knowledgeable in your field as you can, and not trying to change the world immediately, but making, a small um, a small dent initially to then have the aim of making a larger dent. I think what I'm trying to get at is that some people say it's important you can change the world. Anyone can change the world. You've just got to start with your community and then work up. Does that make sense? Because I guess you saying to me, you want to make this change and you want to inspire others to do that. That's wonderful. But how does somebody listening to this or watching it, how does somebody, within their field, profession, academic institution, how do they, make that change? What would be your tips and advice?
Well, I would never advise anyone to fight, literally,
Mhm.
like literally fight. No, 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 no. If you're aggressive and there's a difference between being aggressive and being assertive. So let's point that out first. But if you're aggressive, if you're violent, you're not really making a change. You're only proving the stereotypes that exist around you. Okay. There is a diplomatic approach to everything. Whether you're a DACA recipient or no matter what other profession you're in, if you're just the average citizen and you see something that there's a fault in it, you need to be aware of the fact that you are your own teacher and you are the teacher to the world. If there is this problem you're faced with, this obstacle you're faced with, hold on to it. Okay. I'm not saying you need to throw yourself right out there in the big leagues and try and make a difference. No. As you had mentioned, yeah, you start from something very small. You start to bring awareness. You start to do research, understand your perspective first. Is it just you? What are the contradictions to that? What are the counter arguments that people will make to it? Address that. There has to be a solution. There has to be an addressment. For instance, the most common anti-immigrant rhetoric that we read or we hear about is we take everybody's jobs, we take the welfare, we take the Social Security. Well, we need to wait in line for it. Well, first of all, there's no line. Second of all, we do not take your jobs. The jobs are offered to us. We have the qualifications and the skill sets. If there is a US citizen, especially a boss who can profit from our skill sets, they obviously will take advantage of that. We have no access to welfare or Social Security. We can't, primarily because we can't access them in the first place. We need an identity. We need a Social Security. We need all of these factors to prove we are who we are. Now, if you're saying we find ways and loopholes around it, then what you're basically saying is that you doubt your own government. If you think that they're not strong enough as a system to combat these alleged, fraudsters or alleged thieves. But that's just not the way it works. So here is a common anti-immigrant rhetoric that exists in the world today. What are the counter arguments you can make to that? I just gave you a few. Look at that research. Look at what other people, what the opposing view has, and try and understand what is the phenomenological perspective that led them to this. What was the experience that they decided they're going to stereotype everyone under this one singular or two, mostly one experience? Is this something they just read and they decided, oh, I definitely resonate with this. I'm going to stick with this idea to the end of my days. There's got to be something more there. Ask, communicate. Once you have that, once you have enough content, then start asking for a change. Then start communicating, start addressing it. That's not enough, go bigger. But you are your own teacher. You are the teacher to this system. They should be listening to you. That's the student that needs flexibility and change.
Absolutely. So it's communication is key. You've not necessarily fought with your fists or in a violent way, but what you have done is you've asked questions and you have worked really hard academically, and again with your research, which prompted this interview. You've inspired people to ask questions themselves. It sounds like, which is fantastic. You know,
So sorry.
it's okay.
One of my current positions is to work as a teaching assistant for
Mm,
a course on Harvard's Division of Continuing Education called The Psychology of Self and Identity. And we have students from all over the world. They're all online, different backgrounds, different experiences, different genders, different everything, different cultures, different languages. It's beautiful. The mesh, this blend of the knowledge of minds that come together. And some of they have all these different this information to throw at you, and you as either a teaching assistant or as a professor, you are trying to invoke in them this new knowledge that you have from all your experiences and all your research. And obviously they need to, the hope is that everybody learns from that. But more importantly, in the way that a classroom is set up, or the classroom has been set up, is that the professor, the instructor is there to guide you, to ask you questions that will dwell deep into the things you haven't asked yourself. But at the end of the day, when those students give answers, titles aside, they become our own teachers. I'm more fulfilled from hearing the students speak to me. Now, a couple of years ago, maybe 3, 4 years ago, as I was still in the middle of my master's, before I even started my thesis, I came across someone who was a Trump supporter. I came across many of them, but this one in particular, I used to think that I was a very radical liberal. I used to think, okay, I'm intolerant of intolerance. And yet here I was not listening. I was being intolerant of this person. And it wasn't until I sat down and I literally said to him, okay, explain to me why you think that this is right and that is wrong. Like, I want to understand why. How can you possibly think that this is not unethical? How can you possibly think that this is not affecting? First of all, he had no idea what DACA recipients were. So I had to educate him. And second of all, what I found out, despite these minor differences, despite these political, the scale, this binary creation of two complete opposite extremes that you have to fight and clash against, which is something else I learned that day, he's still human. His experiences are what shaped that perspective. I didn't agree with the methods he had. I didn't really agree with many of the end results, but I understood why he had them. And having that made him one of my closest friends. To this day, I still speak with him.
That's interesting. Yeah, that's really interesting. Again, it's that power of asking questions and listening fundamentally as well. And this has been a really revealing, chat talking to you as well. I have 2 or 3 more questions for you today. I think one of the things that I wanted to cover with you is this sort of, again, perception versus reality, money versus happiness, thing, because I think you'd be a particularly interesting case study for this. As someone that has achieved, we come back to this word a lot, and I'm aware that we've repeated it quite a lot, but as someone who has achieved academically, as someone that has access to a profession, a very lucrative profession in the legal system, and obviously, you've worked for many reputable organizations in your time. You talked a little bit there about working with the students and being fulfilled by that, and really getting a lot out of educating people and working with others, listening and teaching. So I wanted to ask you about what makes you happy. After all of the things you've achieved, does your academic legacy make you the happiest, or does the fact that you have touched the lives of many students from all over the world, what makes you happy? And I guess, does the money that you have access to in your profession or academic, the resources you have access to, make you happy, or is it, I'm answering your question for you, so I'm going to pause and stop myself, and I'm just going to ask you the question without leading you in any particular direction. Basically, what is it that makes you happiest?
So anytime people ask me that question, especially you, it always reminds me of this time when I was living in Somerville, and one of my roommates, who became my closest friend, she said one day when she came home, people who complain about, that money doesn't bring you happiness clearly aren't making enough money. I'm like, okay. But at the end of the day, back then, we were struggling just to pay $700 in rent, each of us, okay? Beautiful house and everything, access to anything we wanted, but God, the amount of money you have to pay in rent, plus trying to work full time and study full time, it was horrible. But anyway, strangely enough, it was the happiest moment, one of the happiest days or happiest experiences in my life, because despite through those struggles, I still had that company. I still had someone to communicate with and someone to share my knowledge with. So going back to your question, my personal happiness comes from very simple things in life. I like teaching. I like writing. I like sketching. I like communicating with others. I like being inspired to pursue my curiosities, like my research. Believe it or not, the person who is this close to me in my life, the Trump supporter, is the one who motivated me and pushed me to do this research on DACA recipients. I like helping. I like growing. It makes me happy. It makes me happy to know that I'm an encyclopedia. For God's sake, use it. Like I have all this knowledge. Where is it going to go? It would be a waste. These are the qualities in life that I live for. They bring me a sense of satisfaction to know that I have the freedom to act on those passions. On the other hand, happiness is a very fleeting sensation. I could have good days with my students and I could have bad days. I could have good days with my relations or bad days. And it's much like hate or anger or sadness or even love in whatever its forms, okay? Money, it's more tangible as a medium. I'm not going to lie about it. Not that I have that in much of it. I'm digging into savings and I still have rent to pay and I still have bills to pay, but happiness doesn't pay for law school. It doesn't apply for financial aid, not even financial aid. It doesn't apply for loans or scholarships, especially as a DACA. It doesn't help me. It doesn't help me pay the rent. It's not going to put food in the fridge. I want and do need money to accomplish my goals, especially to grow as a person, to learn and apply the knowledge because it brings awareness. And we live in a capitalistic society. This is the one thing that people see. Oh, you have brilliant ideas, wonderful, but you're no Plato. So how do you pay for rent? There's got to be something going on there. So between money and happiness, why not both? Why not both?
Yeah.
Money will always bring you a foundation, a concreteness, but happiness is the reason to live for.
Absolutely, absolutely. And what are your goals for the future? Because again, you come from you come from an art. You started wanting, to create as an artist, and you've been through that, and obviously you work in the legal system, and you've got other businesses and projects going on, and also your studies and your academic work and the causes that you are pushing for. What are your goals for the future, and what is left for you to achieve?
So, as you've mentioned many times in many of your questions, as you've seen, and I'm sure our audience is going to see, I have a very polymathic approach. I dip my fingers in just about everything because I want to learn from everything. I think there's an interconnection and reliance of every single topic with one another. You can have arts, you can have science, and you can have social studies all in one. So right now, professionally speaking, my goal is to start law school, get into a grad school program simultaneously at the same time, so I can do a law degree and a PhD. After that, it's to ideally go into law, to focus specifically on civil rights, immigration, criminal law, take that knowledge into academia, then in the long term, both in psychology and the legal field. And then finally, having gained the experience and having drawn and learned even from my very own students, to take that to a public spectrum, public policy changes that would address, if not combat, the legal liminalities and biases that affect communities, not just immigration communities, not just DACA communities, all communities that are identified as minorities in this country, especially. Personally, I mean, the one goal that I think we all strive for is love. I do want love in my life. I do want peace in my life. I do want a cabin in the woods. Like that's the dream, with enough land to turn into a sanctuary for abused animals. I love animals. Animals here, people not so much. I want to know I don't have to worry about making rent or having food to eat. I want to wake up to the sound of the ocean or the sea. It's the one thing that reminds me of home before I came here.
Absolutely, absolutely, and that's wonderful. And I obviously hope to watch you achieve those things in the future. You know, I have every belief that you will do that. Before we do the press and promo bit that I've never got to do with you before, because obviously I was working in a different context when I last interviewed you. So I will give you the chance to plug and promote anything that you wish to plug at the end. My last question is an important one, I feel, because I would like to ask you to again give some advice for anybody who is feeling the pressures of either academic life or feeling the pressures of, if they're a DACA recipient, for example, and they have their, you know, they have a difference or mental health issue that really, you know, they really struggle with. They want to create, they want to succeed academically as you've been able to do, but they really feel the pressure on themselves. And so I want to ask you to reflect a little bit on your bad days, your worst days, if you can, and how you cope. How do you stay motivated? What is it outside of your academic work and the deadlines and the causes that you pursue? Personally, how do you stay motivated on your most difficult days when you feel like the world is against you? And what do you draw from? If you can tell me a little bit more about that.
So let me start with that second question, and then I'll go back to the first one you asked. The second question, well, as I'm sure you've mentioned to the audiences already, I am an artist. I like sketching. I like writing. At first, they were my escapes from reality, the daily reminder of the limitations because of what I was, the punishments and beatings I was getting from my sponsor, my abusive sponsor, the difficulty in connecting people. Like there was no one who knew I existed. Self-derogatory talk, the fear of being societally marginalized, all these were things I wanted to escape from. Writing and drawing helped me escape from them. It just made me think and imagine a world where it was another dimension. I could escape to it and no one would know. You know, no one even knew I existed. So what difference would it make? Now that I'm older, I started seeing these mediums as a confrontation, which is something that was very difficult for me at first. I would like to say, or at least I like to think, that the arts reflect our worst natures. They are the subconscious that disregard human values, the ethics of our personal strive for success, whatever that success may be, for competition, for war. We're lonely and we're alone. We are aware that we exist, but others don't know that we exist. And they don't care. This artwork, these things that I create, my work in general, even if it's a professional work, it keeps me humble. It reminds me above all that I'm human. As human, you will always come face to face with your own thoughts, your own ideas every single day. But having this tangible medium in front of me, staring back, it reaffirms something. It starts to make me question, is this what you want the world to be aware of? Or are you just looking for affirmation for what you think you are and who you want to become? This is how I stay motivated. I can hundreds of times I have sat in a corner and I felt completely abandoned, completely alone. I know there were people who knew I existed. There were people I considered friends, there's family, but not one person came to mind whom I felt I could reach out to and say, you know, give me a reason, you know, make me happy. I want you to change the mood that I'm in right now. But having found myself in that situation, it almost feels like you're submerged, like you can't get out of it. You know you're your own worst enemy, but you feel so comfortable staying in that, you cannot drag yourself out. It takes weeks, months even, to even feel like you have enough energy to walk outside the house. And then you'll see outside your window and it's a beautiful day, and then you feel worse because you just wasted the rest of the day sitting in a corner crying. So it's layer upon layer. But for people who are in similar circumstances, for people who are struggling with mental illness, for DACA recipients who are experiencing this limbo, this twilight state, you don't know what to do with your life, you don't know where to go, you want to plan ahead for a future, but you don't know what that future holds. No education system, no book is ever going to prepare you for tomorrow, ever. We don't know what's going to happen. We didn't expect a pandemic. We didn't expect a war. Everyone is trying to prepare you for something in the future when they don't know the future themselves. We don't know what we have to change. But for people who are going through these struggles, academia, mental illness, uh, immigration status, even just a personal struggle, again, I want to say that it goes back to communication, but people rarely ever listen anymore. They just wait for their turn to speak. You
Mm,
need to understand with yourself that you have a unique way of learning and understanding,
mm,
that whatever you're experiencing is absolutely normal, whatever normal may be. Okay. There are, you are your own teacher. You know your body and your mind better than anyone else. And yeah,
mm,
many times in your life, if not every day of your life, you're going to have to be your own advocate against everyone, against the world, because everyone, the professionals basically fall back on what? Qualifications and research and statistics. You are not a statistic. The moment you start thinking of yourself as another number, that's when you start to be vulnerable to the other's perceptions of you. You may be a statistic to them for the sake of research. You may be a statistic for them for the sake of simplifying a complexity, but you are not a
mm,
number to
mm,
yourself, especially.
mm,
You have a value. Anyone who says that there's this disability, this problem, and that problem that you have, yeah, perhaps everyone has to come up with a new word and medicalize everything every day. But at the end of the day, it's how you feel about yourself. Are you going to let this alleged disability be the drive or the reason for all the limitations that are placed against you? Are you
mm,
going to let this immigration status prevent you from continuously trying to strive for a form of education or a new job?
mm. Mm. Yeah, there's something really powerful in that, and you are your own teacher. That message there, because again, you're constantly learning about yourself and the world around you, and how you can make a difference. And I think that powerful "you are your own teacher" message is overriding in this chat. And I think it's certainly something I will take away from today. And honestly, thank you so much for your succinct responses to my many questions. I could sit and talk to you, as you know, for a very long time, and will continue to do so in different formats. But for today, thank you so much for your time. Before we finish up and before we leave, have you got anything you'd like to add? Anybody you'd like to thank? And what would you like to plug and promote as we close today's chat?
Um, well, for starters, I want to thank you for
My pleasure.
offering me the option of doing this interview. It's been so many years since I've actually seen you, so it's really nice to finally see you again. Um, I definitely would like to thank my professor, my thesis director, Professor Sedlovskaya, and she's the one who's also teaching the psychology course that I mentioned earlier. Um, I would like to thank my friend, um, who would probably like to remain anonymous. Um, and I guess my closest friends, yourself included, the ones who when I am in those little dark corners trying to drag myself out, you always seem to find the right times to reach out to me and have me vent and have me complain and have me cry it out. And you still are there. You can still tolerate me at the end of the day.
Of course,
And
it's a
it's almost like
pleasure.
you already know. You already know, like you said in the past, like I already know you're gonna get out of it. Like you're gonna get better. This is just temporary. You'll get out of it. You have done it before. It's almost like it's like a parabolic effect at this point. Um,
It's a conversation, though, isn't it? Not to interrupt. It's a conversation. We have conversations and we talk stuff out, and I think that goes back to the interview. Talking about listening and reflecting. And I think the interview. You say that the power that listening has in today's society, where people are just waiting for their turn to speak. And so I think that there's something really powerful in that. And it's an absolute pleasure to listen to you talk today, and it's also a pleasure to listen to you talk off record. And I will continue to do that for many years, whether we're in person or otherwise. Again, press and plugging side of things, you do have your own businesses, you do have your own projects. I know that because I follow on Instagram and things like that. It is this would be the time if you wanted to. I'm not gonna again not gonna push you, but where can people find you? Where do you want to direct people if you want to promote those projects?
so I do work as an essay consultant. I do help students with their essay applications, with their theses. their dissertations, any kind of school projects that they have. And I have my own business. It's called Inscripto. You can find information at inscripto.online. It is US based. I do work by myself. None of the work is, outsourced to third world countries or other sources or other freelancers. So I work one-on-one with clients. And as of maybe 5, 6 months ago, I started a business writing love letters for people because I don't think anybody writes letters anymore. But writing love letters, writing wedding vows, eulogies, goodbye letters, even breakup letters, believe it or not, that's a thing. I created that business about 6 months ago. It's called, I think the website is 8-letters.com, but the actual name of the business is 8 Loves One Letter. And yeah, that's it. I mean, as a
Cool.
last shout out to people, well, if anything, I'd like to thank my students. I mean, I wouldn't really be here, wouldn't have chosen this profession in the first place without them. And my mom. My mom, who I do work in her family law firm. It is unapologetic, the kind of environment I work in, especially when it's for your own family. They do expect the most of you. But despite the struggles that we all went through, I was very grateful that I learned from it, and I grew as a person instead of becoming the very monsters that sometimes we make ourselves out to be.
Yeah, I'm amazed by you and your life most every day, and I mean that absolutely to the bottom of my heart. Like, very privileged to have met you when I did, and also have spent time with you, and thank you very much. I am gonna squeeze a question in that I just thought to ask, because again, you have your own business. I hope that this comes across okay, but I'm not going to say you're a cynical person, because I don't experience. I've obviously spoken to you many times about many things, but since you write love letters, Theodora, what is the most powerful message of love that you believe in, that you actually believe in? If you're writing a love letter to anybody, what is the most powerful message of love that you've either written or heard or experienced in your life? Put you on the spot here.
The most powerful message of love.
Like something you actually believe in, as somebody that writes them, as somebody that that works in the medium of love. I don't know if that comes across okay, but I think, because again, love it's an interesting one, and it wasn't something I was going to ask, but I think that
I'm glad you asked.
is there anything that you believe? What do you believe in? When it comes to love, you said you were looking for love and all that, and love means, it doesn't necessarily just mean a relationship romantically.
Yeah.
It can mean multiple things. So what, as someone that writes love letters and all that stuff, what is the message of love that you believe in?
Letting go.
Okay.
And I don't mean specifically, and I've never written a letter that just says that. Nor is it a message that I've just written itself, but there is one person in my life that I love romantically. I care for that person very much, but the circumstances, the distances, miles and countries apart, there is more power, there is more intimacy in knowing that they've touched a part of your life, that they've inspired you to become the person you are, to keep growing, to keep experiencing, and knowing all the while that they're watching, that they're right there with you, but they don't have to physically be with you, that they can experience life on their own. The most powerful message of love I can give to anyone, for no matter what variation of love there is, because again, I go by the ancient Greek wisdom of love. And there's not one, there's many. It's parabolic, it's not a linear line. There's no sparks, there's no fireworks, that doesn't exist. The most powerful message you can give to anyone is to let go.
Okay.
You are not on this planet long enough to hold on to anything permanently. Everything and everyone you meet, you just touch. You touch their lives in some way. You walk away with lessons, with memories, with hobbies, with habits. Let go. You're not there to compartmentalize another human being in any way, shape, or form. You can learn from them, you can grow from them, but there will come a point in life when you will always outgrow someone. Understanding to let go without losing yourself in that is the most powerful message of love, because no one says you have to hate them after you let them go. You can love them like dessert.
I like
When
that.
all the little sprinkles fall, the dessert's still there. You
I
can
like that.
always have that foundation.
I like that. I mean, that's a whole other conversation for another time, Theodora. I've learned a lot from talking to you. I talk to you a lot, but yeah, I've learned a lot talking to you today in this way. So thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it, and I look forward to speaking to you again soon.
Yeah, likewise. I'm really happy we did this. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity.
It's my pleasure.